Hey everybody, this is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and before we get into the action today, I wanted to take a few seconds to talk about Anchor. Anchor is a great app and it is free to use. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Did I mention it's free? There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. That's the Anchor app or anchor.fm to get started today. Happy podcasting. And now, let's get into it. What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of the program. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, whatever time it may be, wherever you may be listening, however you may be listening. I thank you all for listening. As I said, here we are today, episode 18. Today I am recording. It is Friday, July the 16th, 12:46 a.m. So some late night podcasting before I get to bed here. Today's topic, we are talking about Dirty Honey. Dirty Honey, of course, is a new, fresh band out of LA. They formed in 2017. Members include singer Mark Labelle, guitarist John Noto, bassist Justin Smolian, and drummer Corey Coverstone. They are on tour. They're set to go on tour with the Black Crowes beginning July 20th. They've played other shows in the past. They had a small tour with just themselves. There was another opening act where they were the main show. They have also opened shows for Guns N' Roses as well as The Who. They have millions of streams on various platforms, and as of now they have no record label. They are going through independent style, sort of grassroots rock and roll, so it's pretty epic what they're doing, and we're here today to talk about their latest album, their first album actually, released in 2021. It was released back in April, I believe. They had released several singles since their formation in 2017. 2018, they released a single entitled Fire Away, and in 2019, they released a self-titled EP. What they had released prior to this debut album was very strong work. Got me into Dirty Honey, kind of put them on the map, so to speak. Not in a big way, but in a way enough that could catch my attention and other people's attention alike. And, it got them some attention, some notoriety, and something to say, let me keep my eye on this because it might be something significant. And, last episode 17, we talked about Greta Van Fleet's latest album, Battle at Garden's Gate. And this week we're talking again once about Dirty Honey, kind of part of that theme of a rock revival, sort of these bands that are new, that are coming out, that are sort of making this rock and roll music, sort of delivering something that, they're meeting a demand that is there. They're filling the supply for the demand that exists. So this is their first full-length album. It's got 8 brand new tracks. So let's dive on into the work. Let's get into it. Dirty Honey, self-titled album, Dirty Honey. We got a nice cream cover with the Dirty Honey logo, which I like the logo of this band. I think it's fun. It's 2 lips, and the lips say Dirty Honey, and it just looks nice. It's a solid logo, and the album cover, straightforward. Here we are, Dirty Honey. So we start off with the first track of the album. For those of you who are new to the program, typically with an album, kind of introduce what I'm talking about, give a little background, and then I do track by track where I go through each track, talk about the music, the lyrics, its broader meaning overall, and anything and everything in between. And then at the end, I will sum up my thoughts on the whole album and, in this case, what I think of the band, and then I will give it a score on a scale of 1 to 10. So we start with the opening track, which is the lead single from the album, California Dreamin'. It was one of the last tracks they put together. I think they said it was formed mere weeks before the album was to be released. First track, first single, this is the start, Dirty Honey, this is what you're getting. So John Noto, who I mentioned earlier, is the guitarist, and he is a very solid riff machine. Track after track after track, you will hear me mention how much I enjoy his riffs, how much of a fan I am of his riffs, and California Dreamin' is no exception. He delivers quite a solid riff. The other piece of Dirty Honey, who I am a big fan of, is the singer Mark Labelle. His voice, he delivers great range, great control over his voice, and in this case, something I want to focus on is the lyrics. The lyrics are pretty personal for Mark Labelle. Obviously, the band is aware, as I'm sure most of the listeners are, of the famous Mama and Papa's song entitled California Dreamin' from the 1960s. That's typically what people will think of when you mention the song California Dreamin'. But this is kind of a different take. It's not a cover song. It's its own song, unique lyrics, different structure, but it shares a title, and that's about all it shares. But when we get into what the lyrics are focusing on and what the lyrical content is centered on, it's it is focused on the dark side of the California dream. Mark Labelle came from New York to California, met up with John Noto. They kind of formed Dirty Honey from there, with the other members join along. And there was a time where Mark Labelle was homeless when he first came out to California. He was, according to an article I read in the Rolling Stone, he was, showering at the gym. He was spending a lot of time at a gym. He was homeless. And he had come out to California to try to make it big, try to get that fame, that notoriety, make it big as a musician, as a rock star. And he was struggling to get there. So this song lyrically reflects on how many people go to chase their dreams and it doesn't work out for them, and they end up in a darker place, or they end up in a tough spot, or they end up really at rock bottom in some instances. And this takes a look at that lyrically. California Dreamin', it's tearing us apart. Everyone comes out here to achieve some dream and get famous, but it doesn't work out for everybody. And I think that's a very sobering message, and I think it's a very honest message too. But as was also mentioned in the article from the Rolling Stone, Labelle is hopeful that things have turned around for him, and I'm fairly confident that Dirty Honey is a very solid act, and I think they're only going to grow from here. Their trajectory is pointing up. So, another point about this album and California Dreamin' more broadly, as I mentioned, this was kind of put down a few weeks to a few months maybe before the release of the album. So this album was released during a pandemic, and that did have an effect on production and just kind of how the album came to be. So one of the main challenges was they were set to go to Australia to record with their producer, Nick Didia. He had produced their EP from 2019, which if you have not checked that out, I would highly recommend that. It has some of their more popular material on there. But in about March of 2020, the band was set to go to Australia to create this album with Nick Didia. But then, of course, the pandemic became more extreme. COVID-19 began to spread more rapidly. It began to become more of a serious issue. And therefore, their album production got delayed. Like many people, they were stuck in isolation. Things were locked down. And especially as a band, an act that relies on live performances, I can only imagine how tough, being in where you can't perform, you can't do anything to make money. There has to be some kind of drive to keep you going. And the band, in the Rolling Stone article I'm familiar with, which I think most people could be able to find it, there was a lot, just sitting in their apartment and just kind of trying to think of where to go next with, the lyrics, and just trying to create songs. And the drummer, I believe, it was Corey Coverstone, had said in an interview that, the pandemic really helped them to have more time in the creative process, more time in the production process, more time to polish these tracks up and really perfect them to a way where they were overly satisfied with them. But the pandemic, since their producer was overseas, it created challenges with travel and whatnot. So what ended up happening was the band went into a studio. They had a sound engineer in there with them, and the producer joined in via Zoom calls. He had control over their Pro Tools, or he could hear their Pro Tools, and he could talk individually to each band member through their headphones they were wearing. And I thought that was interesting while doing research for the album, reading about that, just how the band was able to make a production of an album work during a pandemic, utilizing Zoom and other video conferencing tools to bring in your producer who is on the other side of the world to make what turns out to be a very quality album. So I think that was interesting how they were able to overcome that and still put forth this quality piece of art. So yeah, that's California Dreamin'. It's a good track. It's got good rhythm. It keeps it going, and it's a fantastic song. We move on now to track number 2, entitled The Wire. This is one of my favorite tracks from the album, I would have to say. I really like Labelle's vocal performances. I think he really pushes that range, and the drummer here, I want to make sure I get his name right. I know I just said it. Corey Coverstone. What a great name. Corey Coverstone, he delivers a solid performance on the drums, a strong backbone to this track. This is one of the first tracks made in preparation of the album. They kind of had this ready before they were going to produce the album. And you can see videos of them performing this live, actually, before the lockdowns and everything were instituted and before things were shut down. So February of 2020, there is video of them performing The Wire live. So the lyrics, from my perspective and my interpretation, they deal with, struggles of a relationship. The relationship has gone to a point where it's like walking a high wire, and it's not. That's what I interpreted from it. I don't have the lyrics in front of me, so I can't exactly cite what I'm specifically, what points I'm referring to and what I'm not referring to, but that's what I took away from it. But I really like Noto's guitar work here. As I said when talking about California Dreamin', he is quite the riff master. He turns up several notable high quality riffs, and The Wire is another one of those that I enjoy the riff on. So Labelle really turns in a great vocal performance. I like the track all around. The riff rocks, and it's awesome just to see kind of riff based guitar playing. And a vocalist who can push their range and just has that flair of the 70s. And it's awesome to see a band like that in this modern day. And The Wire is a perfect example of that, and that's why it's one of my favorite tracks from the album. We move on now to a song entitled Tied Up. Tied Up was I believe it was the second single released in anticipation for the album. Yes, it was the second single released. The big thing that I take away from this song is the groove, the feel that it has. And that's a big thing in music in general. Groove and feel, and just, does the music move you? What does it make you feel? Those are two huge aspects of music. And this one is very groovy. Justin, I'm not very great with the members' names, I'll admit that. But Justin Smolian on the bass delivers. He's underneath all that. He is keeping the groove going as any bass player would. Tied Up. This was another song similar to The Wire that was prepared several months in advance of production. It was one of the few that they had ready to go before meeting with their producer. It's got a soulful feel to the track. The backing vocals, they added some backup vocals from, I'm sure, I don't know how many singers it was, but it was a small group of singers, female vocalists. They add a nice flavor to it, something that Dirty Honey on their own can't add. So they add a nice layer to the track. It was released as a second single, as I said. And lyrically, if we look at what the lyrics are kind of talking about here, it reflects someone who knows that a relationship isn't going to work and they feel just tied up in it, but they can't leave. They're tied up and they're just caught up in their circumstances. That was my interpretation. I could be totally out of left field on that, but that's what I took away from reading the lyrics and listening to the song. But the big takeaways for me on this track were what the backup vocals add and that extra flair, and lyrically the song dealing with the circumstances of our narrator's relationship. We move on now to track 4, Take My Hand, and we are flying through this podcast review. This album is under 30 minutes in length for 8 songs, so it is a quick listen compared to some other music that is out there, especially in the heavier metal genres. Those can go on for several minutes in length, but the songs, if you want to listen to this album, it's really not that hard to chunk out that small amount of time compared to some other music. You can listen to this whole album in less than half an hour. So that's great. And sorry if I'm kind of chunking through this podcast really quick, but that's just kind of how it is. There's not a whole lot to talk about. The songs are just kind of, they are what they are. They're straightforward, and there's not a whole lot of, nuance or hidden meaning. I mean, there is some, but it's not, something super in depth. It's not like progressive metal here. But anyway, Take My Hand, one of the big things I thought about after hearing this, and I still kind of make this connection, the riff off the top reminds me of Led Zeppelin's The Ocean, and I would love to hear those two side by side. They're not identical, and it's not like, oh, they're stealing, and I know as a Greta Van Fleet fan, I would not want any Zeppelin comparison to kind of halt Dirty Honey's career, but I think if anything, that's a compliment, and it really, the only thing that is similar between the two is the rhythmic pattern off the opening riff, but that was just a connection I made in my head. And then there's the opening riff, and then a riff that transitions into the first verse that John Noto introduces brilliantly, and that riff in the first verse, that is a solid riff. It's heavier, it's got a little more meat to it, a little more beef to it. But John Noto once again delivers great guitar work on this song, Take My Hand. It's another song that was ready before production, so these last 3, The Wire, Tied Up, and Take My Hand, they were all kind of prepared before they were ready to travel to Australia, which they never did. But it originated out of a sound check at an LA club. I like the story of how this song came to be. They just sort of were jamming one day, and then I think at a show in New York before Labelle, he hummed some melody into his phone, the microphone on his phone, and he recorded it, and he was kind of listening to it back. And at a show that night in New York, he said, guys, I'm going to do something a little different lyrically, but just keep doing your thing musically. And the band did, and it kind of evolved into this song. And I think that's something a lot of bands can relate to, especially bands that are younger and they're still, fiercely creating, and they're just constantly making new stuff. Just kind of what songs can be made from the road. I know there were certainly Greta Van Fleet songs that originated, as soon as they finish another album, they're writing a new material. The creative process truly never stops for a lot of these younger bands, and I'm sure older bands alike. But the idea that this song, it started at a sound check and it grew into a song that's featured on their album. It reminds me of the track Broken Bells from Greta Van Fleet's latest album, The Battle at Garden's Gate. And if you haven't listened to that podcast yet, you can go back and listen to that. But the Battle at Broken Bells from The Battle at Garden's Gate originated as a little passage that their drummer actually was playing on guitar on his Instagram page, and now it got featured on their album. Similar way with Take My Hand, how it started just as a jam sesh that they had at a sound check, and it grew into a whole song. So you never know, for musicians out there, and myself included, you never know where that inspiration is going to come from. And every little phrase, every little lick, you can hold on to those, and it might grow into something, and you just never know. So it's a straightforward rocker. That's pretty much most of the album. They're just straight up. Here we are, Dirty Honey. Here's the riff, verse, chorus, riff over all of it. We're out of here. We move on now to track number 5, that is called Gypsy. Now, the track 3 it was, Tied Up. I'm a Rival Sons fan as well, and there's a Rival Sons song called Tied Up as well, so there was a comparison there. There is a Ronnie James Dio song called Gypsy, and there's also a Dirty Honey song called Gypsy. Again, not accusing them of stealing. None of those songs are covers. It's just a fun connection that I made. But getting into the track and my notes on Gypsy, I love the feel of this track. It just reminds me of just travel and going towards something. That's really what the rhythm and the backing beat and just what the rhythm section is playing here, it just makes me feel of pushing towards something. It's pushing the listener forward, and the lyrics kind of reflect that too. I'm on my way, feeling like a gypsy. Our narrator, our protagonist, however you want to think of it as, they're pushing towards something. Comparisons to a gypsy, I can't speak really on what Labelle, I'm assuming he wrote it, what Labelle was thinking about, what Labelle was, trying to say, what's the relevance of gypsy. I couldn't say for sure, but musically and in the chorus, I definitely get the sense of moving towards something and, pushing forward and travel and going onward. This was the third single released from the album. I think it was the last single because I think they only did 3 tracks before the release of the album. The second and third single weren't official singles, so if you go on their Spotify page under singles and EPs, you'll only see one single from this album, and that's California Dreamin'. But there's a point in Gypsy where things kind of drop down, and I think the bass drops out and the guitars playing a little kind of reduced part, and the drums kind of quiet down, and the vocalist Labelle is just kind of throwing out some ad-libs or whatever, and then we get into the solo, and the solo, I was listening to this because this is probably my 3rd or 4th listen through the album when I listened to it earlier today. It brings some serious heat. It kind of caught me off guard. John Noto delivers on this track in the solo. He is a phenomenal guitarist, and I think anyone who is a guitarist should definitely pay attention to him because, of course, you've got your greats, you've got your legends, but this man is currently killing the game, and he's solid. Maybe he's not the flashiest guy. Maybe he doesn't do sweep picking or anything crazy like that, but he delivers great riffs, and I need to get on it, and I need to learn some of his material because very solid stuff. But the band delivers a fantastic performance. I really like what each member just contributes here, and it really gels together to make a great song in Gypsy. We move on now to track number 6 called No Warning. This is another one where the riff is something that my mind and my ears just lock onto, so this is kind of a riff-centered track in my eyes. The lyrics seem to suggest someone who's ready to leave a relationship. They're ready to go without a warning, as the lyrics say. You better talk soon because I'm going without a warning. You better explain yourself or I'm gone. So they're willing to give another chance maybe, but they're kind of at the last straw. They're at the end of their wits. But Mark Labelle, hats off to that man. He delivers a fantastic vocal performance. This one is shorter in length. It's not extremely popular. I think it might have less than 500,000 streams on Spotify, which, listen to me, I'm just a little guy who does cover videos once a week on YouTube, and my whole channel combined only has slightly over 1,000 views. So that would still be fantastic, and I would take those numbers. But compared to some of the other tracks, it's one of the lesser streamed, which I can't understand why. It's a straightforward track to just rock out to. And I just love the way Labelle sings, and I love the way it flows. I like the way that their choruses are open in a lot of the songs, and they're fun, and you can sing along with them. And it's something that's gets stuck in your head, and that's why I think it's great just to keep going back to it, because you get that earworm and you just want to come back and you want to play it again. You want to put it on repeat. And that's the way I feel about a lot of their music. And we move now to track number 7, which is entitled The Morning. The opening riff is catchy. I said from the top I'd be talking about the riff a lot. I wish, the riffs are catchy, and I get them mixed up in my head. Otherwise I would hum them out for you guys or just give you an idea of what they sound like, but I don't want to be singing the wrong riff for you, so I'm going to refrain from doing that today, but the riff is catchy here from the top. Mark Labelle sounds great. I'm beginning to sound like a broken record. I get it, but this stuff is so true. And I think it's important that I keep harping on this because I'm sure a lot of the audience might not be too familiar with Dirty Honey, and I want to do anything and everything I can to get this band's name out there and really make sure that they are included in this rock revival and that this rock revival is successful. So that's why I've taken the time to talk about Greta Van Fleet and Dirty Honey, not just because I like them, but because I think it's valuable to use my platform and do what I can to boost these guys' music, because it's phenomenal stuff, and I think there is a real thirst, there is a hunger for rock and roll music out there, and these guys can deliver it, and they will hopefully deliver it for years and years and decades to come, because they are young, and they've got hunger, and they've got fuel to their fire. So let's really get this going. Let's get these guys to the top. Let's get them where they need to go. But the morning, the narrator appears to be attempting to score, pretty much. This is straightforward. You can't have a classic rock revival without a song. It's got some sexual themes to it. Aerosmith and the Rolling Stones are pretty big influences of Dirty Honey, as was admitted in an interview, and this kind of really draws on those kind of Mick Jagger, Steven Tyler-like lines, with some certain sexual innuendos in there. And our narrator, our protagonist, our lead singer here, he cannot wait for the next morning, and he can't, next morning waking up next to, hopefully, a very attractive someone from the night before. Straightforward song, not really nuanced or deeper meaning in those lyrics. It's pretty straightforward. It's a solid track altogether, and one that I am a fan of. We now move to their final track, the closer on the album, track 8. Another Last Time is the title. It's one of the longer songs on the track, and this one, they just deliver a different feel. It's slower in tempo. It's got a more blues feel to it, and the blues feel is not something that is uncommon for Dirty Honey. They did a cover of Aerosmith's Last Child and released that as a single, and that song was very bluesy in nature. It has a similar feel to Another Last Time, but I love the slower feel. I think Labelle's vocals and his lyrics over top, I find myself singing along at the chorus, as I mentioned. That's something I like about these bands. The chorus, they really get, it's fun to sing along to. It's something that sticks in your head, an earworm, where you just kind of vibe, just listen to it, and it's good music. You just hang out to it. But I think here we have a protagonist going through a breakup or a separation, and they're hoping for some sort of rekindling, like, let's do this for one last time. Like, let's give this another chance sort of deal. That's the sort of message that's being portrayed in my eyes. It differs from the rest of the album, this song does. It's like I said, it's not as upbeat. It's not as catchy, or not to say it's not catchy. That's not the right word. It's not as in your face. It's not as, straightforward rocker. It's more of a drawn out blues with these really open passages where Labelle's singing what he's singing, So I think it's a good closer to the album. It kind of shows a contrast between the band's sound, and I think it's a great way to just kind of softly take us out as we finish out on Dirty Honey's debut album. So if we take a step back and we look at these 8 tracks, I know I kind of flew through them compared to some other episodes, but like I said, some songs you just have more to say about others. I'm glad, though, that I did take the time to cover this band and cover this album. I think it is worthwhile, and I hope that all of you listening right now go check out Dirty Honey and give them a listen, and look forward to future releases from them, because even though this album just came out a mere few months ago, I cannot wait for the next one already. They've come a long way from their first EP in 2019. That was really my introduction to them, and I was a big fan then, and I'm a big fan now. I like what they're bringing. I hope they keep bringing it. I hope they keep evolving and getting better, and just, keep this classic rock revival going. I want to support these bands because I want to be able to tell my kids someday, hey, I saw Dirty Honey in concert. I remember when their album came out. I listened to it front to back. It was a great album, because just as I love, Led Zeppelin and Metallica and bands from my parents' days, Dirty Honey, Greta Van Fleet, Rival Sons, they're going to be the bands from my era that hopefully my offspring will like one day. But that's all hopes and dreams. it is fun to think about. But hopefully Dirty Honey as a band can keep going and they can keep growing, and I absolutely believe they will. Their trajectory is pointing nothing but upward, and hopefully someday they can become a household name in the current rock scene. So now's the point where I score these 8 tracks, this whole album, Dirty Honey, self-titled, release in 2021. If I scored that on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 9 out of 10. That's right, a 9 out of 10, folks. It's a very solid rating. Album absolutely deserves it. Certainly there's, is it the best album I've ever heard? No. Definitely not the worst album I've ever heard either. It's very good. It's very solid for where they're at, and I know they'll only get better from here. So next time on Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, and I apologize that the schedule has not been as consistent as of late, but whenever I get back in here, I am going to talk about the best drummers in rock and metal history. Hopefully I will have a few drummer friends of mine join me, and we can sort of go back and forth and talk about our thoughts on it and maybe come to a conclusion of some sort of list by the end of the episode. But I'm really hoping that this next episode is something that I can put together, and I'm hoping to make it really special. But stay tuned for that. Again, I can't promise when that's going to be. I apologize for the inconsistency with the schedule, but we've just wrapped up episode 18 here on Dirty Honey's debut album, self-titled release, entitled Dirty Honey, of course, released in 2021, 8 tracks. It's less than half an hour in length. You really got no reason to listen to this if you're a fan of rock music. Check them out, and they are going on tour July 20th, opening up for the Black Crowes. So if you're a Black Crowes fan, it would be a great opportunity to see Dirty Honey as well. That's going to do it for us here tonight, and as always, never stop rocking.